Life will never be the same again after coronavirus. It's one of those landmark events. It's like the generation that went through World War II or my generation that went through 9/11. It's almost inconceivable that people can forget these things, but they do. One day people are going to forget coronavirus, but the effects will still be there. So I want to record for posterity not only what happened, but a solution. Somebody has to talk about the solution to this kind of tyrannical imposition on our lives. What am I talking about?
Please move away from each other and separate.
Elizabeth, New Jersey is now using drones to spread the life-saving message.
You are not immune to this virus.
老奶奶，别看了，这是咱们村的无人机啊！你不戴口罩就不要出去，不要乱跑，记得赶紧回家，回家洗洗手，对吧？注意一下卫生，对吧？咱们村这么多人都说你都说不住，非得派无人机过来飞你，过来飞你，过来飞你。
These drones that are coming out, they're telling you one thing. The government has had a taste of tyranny, of total control, where they're tracking whether you're even coughing in a legally approved way, whether you're covering yourself, whether you're standing next to someone with enough distance between you and another person, whether your temperature is correct, whether you're allowed to be outside of your house. These things are changing because we're in the end times. Is anybody else as concerned as me, as a Christian, as a church leader, that so many changes have happened in such a staggering speed? You know, the drones coming out to monitor us, and the loss of freedom of movement and the loss of freedom of privacy. All these things, they're not even the worst of what's happening. I'm going to show you more, but I just want to give you some solution because I'm not the type of person to just focus on the problem. God called me to preach solutions. I believe Jesus is the solution and Jesus gives us the wisdom. Did you know that New Zealand's Prime Minister rushed the world's most extreme abortion legislation into law while the country was distracted with the pandemic? This happened on March 18, 2020. This lady, what is wrong with this lady? She introduced the most extreme abortion law in the world during the coronavirus lockdown. The bill passed by a vote of 68 to 51. The new law means that New Zealand has now the most extreme abortion law in the world. This will include abortion on demand for any reason up to birth. Sex-selective abortion will be legalized. It is legalized now in New Zealand. So what happened to women's rights? What happened to protecting little girls? Abortion will be available up to birth for disabilities including cleft lip, clubfoot, and Down syndrome. There will be no requirement that a doctor must be involved with providing an abortion. There will be no legal requirement that babies born alive after a so-called failed abortion should be given medical support. No legal requirement that pain relief be given to babies being aborted after 20 weeks old. And we know for sure, according to science, that these little babies feel the pain of having their limbs torn apart from their bodies while they're alive. There are no legal restrictions on controversial methods of abortion, such as intact dilation and extraction abortions, known as partial birth abortions. Now, polling shows these measures, particularly the women. Only 2% of the women support abortion being given on demand up to birth. Why is this Jacinda Ardern doing these things? If she's representing the people, why does she do it during the coronavirus lockdown? Where is the transparency? And I'm concerned that people during lockdown become so compliant and become so fearful that they're no longer holding people in power accountable, and they're letting them have free rein to pass wicked laws. We don't have to go far to see a plague of corruption and evil going on in the world. Our state, Victoria, Australia, suffers this plague. It's worse than the coronavirus. You know, our Labor politicians are celebrating laws that are an offense to good religious people. But they want to criminalize religious faith. And here's a release for Victorians. that laws are to commence during coronavirus lockdown to deliver fairer birth certificates. And that means that you can just change your gender to male, female, or anything else that's gender diverse or non-binary without having any medical proof to go with it, without having undergone any medical procedure to substantiate your claim that you're a different gender. It's just on your whim. It's just on your say-so. What's the long-term effect of that on society? They don't know. They have no idea. We have thousands of years of track record of what a stable nuclear family does to society, and we have no track record of what they're doing to society. And already we're beginning to see the signs of confusion in sports, where men who claim to be women are participating and have an unfair physical advantage. We're seeing problems now where people in prison, maybe the female prison, is now being populated by men who claim to be females. They're born biological men, but now they can change their birth certificates. What's the implication? What's the impact of that? They don't know. Well, in case people forgot, churches closed down during Easter, during Passover, for the first time in the free world in 2,000 years. Included in that were bans on weddings and funerals. There is what's called a controlled demolition of small businesses. Many of them have gone out of business and they're not ever going to come back. There's an unprecedented $2 trillion corporate bailout. The bill is called H.R. 748, and it was signed into law by President Trump. We're going to talk about the unusualness of this bill. Warren Buffett, the greatest stock picker, the greatest value investor of the century, has warned of extreme consequences from the Fed's recent moves. And in fact, he's the type of person to watch whether he's buying something because he considers the value cheap. And despite the crash of the Dow Jones, he has dumped all of his airline shares, all. And he sold them for a loss. What does that mean? That means that as a value investor, he doesn't see any long-term gain to be made in the airline industry. What does that speak about this entire industry that moves people around the world? There's unprecedented growth of government power. The use of drones to shout at and intimidate citizens. I'll show you more of that.
小朋友，现在是非常时期，别在外面溜达，口罩也没戴，赶快往家走。现在这个冠状病毒多严重啊！快跑！别再出来了啊！在家好好待着，为社会做贡献。
Checkpoints to test drivers for coronavirus. Police harassment of people at the beach. You know, the beach is one of the cleanest places for you to be. The sand is healthy for you. The salted water is healthy for you. It's a very clean environment, very sanitized environment as far as viruses go. And they're harassing people, and the police is harassing children on play dates. I'll show you that video too. You got to stick with this video because I'm going to give you the solution. I'm going to show you the problems. It's going to be worth your time to watch the whole thing. But the worst part of all this is the passing of laws under the radar during the coronavirus lockdown. So I know that Christians and a lot of leaders are guilty of being long on problems and short on the solutions. I don't want to do that. I've sat in many Christian meetings, many pastoral gatherings, where most of the people just sit and complain about the problems. And sometimes I just want to ask, what about the solution? Are we not the people of God? Are we not endowed and filled with the Holy Spirit? Do we not have the mind of Christ? So I want to give you the mind of Christ for this, because the coronavirus lockdown is not the end, it's just the beginning. And there will be worse problems, and there will be another pandemic, because the politicians have gotten a taste for what fear can do to make people relinquish their rights, and for the state to increase its power. I hope every politician, every leader listens to this who cares about freedom. Pass a law now that says if we are locked down, politicians are locked down. If we are not paid, politicians are not paid. If we don't work, politicians don't work. Politicians are not qualified to decide what is essential work. You know, most of them were mediocre students, mediocre graduates, and now they're mediocre people trying to rule over us. They are not qualified. I was number one in my class, graduated summa cum laude, valedictorian of my class. And I don't feel qualified to tell people when they can leave and not leave their home. I don't feel qualified to have other people report to me when they should stay home and when they should go back to work. Who are these people with these supernatural powers to tell citizens what's best for them? You can call this legislation by many names. Let me give you some names. You can call it the anti-stealth legislation. That means no passing laws on the sly. No passing laws without transparency, public support, and due diligence. What would be wrong with that type of legislation? You can call it anti-draconian law. For those who know their Greek history, Draco or Dracon lived around 600 BC. He was the first recorded legislator of Athens, the city-state of ancient Greece. And he's called the first democratic lawmaker. But guess what? He was known for his harsh and unforgiving written laws. You know, when the laws were oral and they were based on family and community, there was flexibility. But when you write down harsh laws that are unbendable, they call that draconian law. Well, we should have an anti-draconian law. We know Dracon was so bad. Why don't we have such a law to prevent draconian laws? If you want a more emotive name, I call it this, the anti-cockroach laws. You know why? When I used to live in Asia, the thing that I disliked was in the middle of the night, if you left food outside, the cockroaches come and they walk all over it and they eat it. The cockroaches come at night. So you know what? We should say no cockroaches in the middle of the night. No new laws unrelated to the lockdown in the middle of the lockdown. We are anti-cockroach. You can call it the anti-taking advantage of a crisis law. Call it anti-tyrant during a crisis law. You might ask, how would you prevent a tyrant from rising up? What's happened over and over in history, even in so-called democracy. So why don't we have a law that says, no law made during a crisis shall be permanent and shall be repealed within 6 months. That way politicians don't take advantage of people's fear or people's vulnerability to push through laws that simply propel their extreme radical ideology. You can simply call it an anti-lockdown laws legislation. It's an anti-lockdown law. Lockdown applies to politicians as much as to citizens. They shouldn't be busy doing stuff that's irrelevant to the lockdown. You only have to read the Bible, you only have to study history to see that power-mad politicians are a plague on earth. And they have now tasted what a lockdown can do to vastly expand their reach and vastly expand their power. And I believe that the solution is the church. The church is the one entity that stands against tyranny, stands against corrupt politicians. Who else speaks about the truth? Who else speaks about morals? So if the church is weakened, if religious liberties are curtailed, then political power will expand. And I'm amazed because Tucker Carlson saw this. Tucker Carlson on Fox News understands this better than even many Christians and Christian leaders. And he called us out. And he said, why are we, the leaders, allowing politicians to tell us that we cannot meet as a church? Where did they get this right? So I want to show you what I consider the best episode I've ever seen of the Tucker Carlson show.
You may have seen this tape already. If not, you've likely seen many more like it in the past few weeks. 2 armed officers arrive at a family's home in Wisconsin. Someone has reported the mother to police for arranging a play date for her daughter. That's now a crime. Here's what happened next.
Are you aware that we're in a stay-at-home order right now? Yeah, obviously.
By the government?
Yes, I am aware.
Okay, you're aware of that?
I am aware.
I don't need to explain that to you?
Why are you here?
Because your daughter is going to play at other people's home and you're allowing it to happen. Stop having your kid go by other people's home.
Are we done here?
No, we're not.
Okay.
Middle initial and your last name.
I'm not giving it to you. I haven't done anything wrong.
Okay. Perfect. We got it.
Okay.
And that'll be documented too that you're uncooperative.
You were uncooperative. That will be documented. Notice the tone they strike with this mother. They are standing on her property, uninvited, hectoring her about the so-called crime of allowing her daughter to play outside the house. They're not apologizing for this. They're not embarrassed to be carrying out an order that has no basis in science. They are utterly self-confident. They treat her with pure contempt like a peasant. And later, the Calumet County Sheriff's Department posted an account of what happened on their Facebook page. In it, they refer to that mother's mobile home 6 times. Just, she lives in a mobile home. Oh, just a prole, just a peasant. Shut up and obey. Who cares what she thinks? They believe they have the right to do that. The question is, where exactly do they get that right? That's a good question. It's a question that we are strongly discouraged from asking. The short answer is governors told them they could. Never in American history have politicians been more powerful than they are now. Effectively, they are gods. In the state of Maine, for example, Governor Janet Mills now has the power to suspend any law she doesn't like. She can seize any state resource she feels like seizing. She can force any citizen or all citizens from their home. She can do all of this for as long as she wants, as long as she believes Maine is in a state of emergency. In fact, there's virtually nothing that Janet Mills can't now do. Many governors now have these powers. J.B. Pritzker is the governor of Illinois. On Monday, Pritzker did his best to explain why his word is now law in the state. It has to be law, he explained. Otherwise, thousands would die.
The stay-at-home order has prevented tens of thousands of illnesses and thousands of deaths. History will remember those who put politics aside to come together to keep people safe. It will also remember those who so blindly devoted to ideology and the pursuit of personal celebrity that they made an enemy of science and of reason.
In 3 sentences, Governor Pritzker framed himself as a leader of historic stature. Those who doubt his decrees are, quote, enemies of science and reason, enemies of civilization itself, enemies of the state. 2 days later, on Wednesday, this Wednesday, it emerged that Pritzker's own wife, who has her own state employees, was one of these people. His wife apparently had violated the lockdown herself. Governor Pritzker was asked about this. Here's how he responded.
What is your response to people who say the stay-at-home order and non-essential travel bans aren't being abided by your family? I believe there's a report from Illinois Rising Action that says that she recently traveled to Florida.
Well, first of all, I want to say that in politics, it used to be that we kept our families out of it. My official duties have nothing to do with my family. So I'm just not going to answer that question. It's inappropriate, and I find it reprehensible, honestly, that that reporter wrote a story about it.
Yeah, how dare someone cover that? Asking about whether or not J.B. Pritzker's own family is obeying the order that your family is morally obligated to follow is, quote, inappropriate. Indeed, the governor says it is reprehensible. How dare you? It would be very useful in moments like this to have an independent media. News organizations exist to hold the powerful to account. Here we have the powerful acting with no accountability at all. And our news media, they are cheering it on, besotted fangirls. No abuse is too grotesque for them. No talking point is too stupid to repeat. Reporters will do whatever they are told. They are all in. MSNBC recently sent a camera crew to document one of the latest and most Orwellian developments in America's descent into Chinese-style social control, barking drones that harangue citizens from the air. MSNBC was delighted by it.
Please move away from each other and separate.
Elizabeth, New Jersey is now using drones to spread the life-saving message.
You are not immune to this virus.
Move away from each other, commands the state of New Jersey. Break it up! Your God-given right to free assembly has been suspended indefinitely. Back inside, proles, or you will face the consequences. MSNBC applauds this as if it's all completely normal. In fact, it is, they tell us, a life-saving message. Handmaidens to the corona security state. But to their credit, at least MSNBC put it on television. Most outlets don't even bother to cover stories like this. The other day, prosecutors in New Jersey charged 9 people for daring to participate in a Jewish wedding in their backyard. A few months ago, that would have made the news. For 250 years, Americans have enjoyed the unfettered right to practice their faith as they choose. Now they don't. It happened overnight. Last month, Christians across the country were legally prohibited from celebrating Easter in their own churches. The national media barely noted it. How exactly is this happening? Well, it turns out that's not clear. Strangely, not very many people have asked. Politicians have no right to do any of this. They cannot make it illegal for people to go to religious services. The Constitution of the United States expressly prohibits that. The words could not be clearer. The First Amendment explicitly prevents government from making any law that inhibits the exercise of religious faith. That's not a detail or a footnote. It is a cornerstone of our history and of our legal system. Millions of people, probably your ancestors, fled to this country from around the world precisely because our Bill of Rights gave them this guarantee. It's why this country was founded. And in a moment, it's gone. How? Where did politicians get the authority to do this? Because some elderly, power-drunk epidemiologist told them to do it? That's not how our system works. It can't work that way. Occasionally, you hear someone complain about this. Some lonely civil libertarian will fret that we may be on a slippery slope toward losing our rights. If only. We're already there. We've slid to the bottom of that slope. Our rights are gone. No one has explained how politicians are allowed to do this. Where's the authority come from? How can they override the Constitution? Nobody seems to care. They're too afraid. But if you think this moment is scary, consider what might come next. Now that we've ceded all authority in the country to our political leaders, what can't they do? What are the limits to their power? That's not a theoretical question. It's not an argument over philosophy or political theory. It is the most practical possible question. The answer will define where this country goes next. What can't politicians do in the name of public health? As it stands, politicians won't let people worship or work or go to school or see their aging parents. They place the nation under house arrest. That's happening today, right now. But let's say we all get more afraid. What then? What couldn't they start doing? Could they intern people? Seriously. You can dismiss the possibility of that if you like, but remember that just a few months ago, most of us would have dismissed as ludicrous the possibility that propaganda-spewing drones would be hovering above. Now we have them. So what's next? What can't they do? Let's draw a line at some point.